Join me, 48 Hours correspondent Erin Moriarty, on my podcast, My Life of Crime, as I take on true crime investigations like no other. This season, I'm looking into the labyrinth of crime and secrets within families. I'm cutting straight to the evidence and talking to the people directly involved, including investigators and the families of victims. Listen to My Life of Crime with Erin Moriarty wherever you get your podcasts.
Inspired by the life of the savvy and ambitious Colombian businesswoman Griselda Blanco comes a new Netflix original limited series. Griselda tells the story of a devoted mother who, with her lethal blend of charm and relentless savagery, creates one of the most powerful cartels in history. Witness Sofia Vergara's captivating transformation into the godmother of the underworld. Griselda, streaming January 25th, only on Netflix.
A note to listeners. The following podcast contains content that may not be suitable for all audiences. Discretion is advised.
Whenever Molly went missing, he and another person, the one that you confirmed the story with, had taken night vision onto the property that is in question, I guess, the next property. There were guys walking around with guns around the cabin that looked totally high out of their minds, and it freaked both of them out so much they left. But something that surprised me early on, I met one of a law enforcement officer, I won't say which branch, a very close friend of mine, and he's like, "Hey, don't go on this ranch without a gun." And I was like, okay. So I found it extremely suspicious for a girl's shirt to be on this property, hanging in a tree, cut up with a knife, and have matted blood around the neck. There should not be a girl's shirt on this ranch.
You are listening to Partners in True Crime. We are your hosts, Rob and Cindy Dorfman.
Today, we are talking to Toby Thomas, who is an entrepreneur and philanthropist, who has a unique perspective on this case.
Toby's not a native of Love County, and he's not related to anyone in this case, but he quickly became involved in the Molly and Colt murders after purchasing the 3,000-acre ranch where Moxley Lake is located.
We went to Moxley Lake in 2018 for the television show, and the hair on the back of my neck stood up. There's definitely a lot of supernatural energy there, and you can feel it. We went to the part of the lake that looks like a swimming hole, and this is where Paula believes Molly and Colt's bodies might be.
In March 2014, Love County 911 dispatch received a butt dial 911 call from Colby Barrack's cell phone from Moxley Lake, where Colby, Keith Gordon, and Jim Taylor, who can be heard discussing Molly and Colt. All three were ticketed for trespassing on Moxley Lake by Love County sheriffs.
In 2019, Paula asked former Love County Sheriff Marty Grisham to search Moxley Lake, and Marty brought in Oklahoma Highway Patrol to do a dive. Unfortunately, nothing was found.
But Toby did discover a few other things on his property, and we're happy to talk to him.
Good morning, sir.
Hey, Toby, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing good. I have my wife here and partner in true crime, Cindy.
Hi, Toby.
Hey,
how are
Cindy.
you?
I'm doing wonderful. And yourself?
I'm good, thank you.
Toby, we want to start off with, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your connection to this case? Give us a little bit about your background and where you live and your connection to this case.
I'd be happy to. I started a company back in 2009. It became a very large kind of international company. And in 2016, we sold that business, and it was a mission critical. We serviced data centers and telecom facilities, and I had a software company. And my wife and I had grown up kind of in small towns, and we always wanted to have some land. And so when we sold the business, I was introduced to Battle Springs Ranch by a colleague of mine. Drove up, saw the ranch, absolutely loved it, asked how much the guy wanted for it, and shook his hand and drove home and told my wife that we just bought a 3,000-acre ranch. She was quite taken aback by that, came up and loved it, and said it was a wonderful decision. We bought the ranch 2016, which is just north of Marietta and just south of Ardmore, Oklahoma. So the connection to the case. After we bought the ranch, one of my good friends who's law enforcement here, I just got to know him, and he said, "Hey, by the way, this ranch is involved in a missing persons case." And I was like, "Oh, really?" And he's like, "Yeah." He's like, "There's rumors that there's two people that are buried on the ranch." And so obviously I'm pretty inquisitive, and in my business kind of background, companies hire me to help solve problems. So I get real into kind of digging into things and trying to figure out what the missing pieces are and things like that, and learn so much about the case. One of them was from one of the shows y'all did. And so it's always intrigued me. We've always been looking for signs. Paula had reached out to me shortly after we had purchased the ranch. And she's a wonderful person, and told her, I'd say, hey, anything that we can do to help, we're here. We want to help solve this or contribute anything we can. And so that's kind of how Paula and I got connected. We had a lot of investigators come out and some PIs. And so I'll go through kind of my first dealing with someone coming on the ranch looking for Molly and Colt. So we bought the ranch. We closed the ranch December of 2016. Early 2017, a gentleman named Jim Diggs had reached out to me. And I don't know if Paula had hired him or if it was, I think he may have just been volunteering. And his brother called and wanted to see if they could come look at some old wells on the ranch. And I was like, absolutely. So I went and hung out with him a little bit. We were talking. It's like, well, have y'all checked the big, we call it a gar pit because there's always alligator gars in it. And it's in between the North Lake and the South Lake on the property. And there's a spillway that in 1918 was built by the guys that kind of designed Battle Springs Ranch as a hunting club. And there's this big hole it's always full of water. It's spring fed. And the guys were like, what are you talking about? And I was like, oh, it's just right around the corner. So like, well, take us there. And I took them there, and they just were shocked. They're like, we've never seen this, did not know this existed. So we took a lot of pictures of it. I think you and Paula not long after had gone and I think you actually saw that hole.
Yes, we did.
Yeah. So that area always intrigued me. And the reason intrigued me, this is before I'd heard about where the 911 call had been pinged. On that ranch, when we bought it, it was pretty much left to nature. Previous owners had inherited that ranch, and they didn't spend a lot of time out there. They wanted to turn it into a state-sponsored sanctuary for nature, which is kind of cool in its own way, but it was never improved, never updated. I mean, it was just land. And I knew I'd been told it was a very poached property, and it was probably the most poached property in Love County because the previous owners would not prosecute anyone that was on that property. And we had some run-ins with some locals that were not super excited that a couple from Dallas bought this property. But those are some of the characters that I think have been mentioned on your podcast. But our neighbors are wonderful out there, just amazing people. I started digging into it more. There was an old, which y'all didn't see when you came. The only thing on that property was there's an old cabin there. If you had come around that corner, you probably saw our lodge. It may not have been built when you were there, but we've got a big lodge on top of this little hill in between the lakes. And that cabin was located there. It was an old creepy cabin. And we went in, and it was like someone had just left. There was clothes still in it. And I dated when they left because there were some old magazines inside the cabin, and they were advertising Bose cassette players for your house. I mean, this takes you back to probably the late 80s. So I started thinking through, okay, if they crashed on Long Hollow and they were running and they didn't know the area, our ranch gate is directly across from Long Hollow. So if you come out and you were not to turn left or right, you'd go right through our gate. And if I was thinking that at night, if someone is scared and they're running, they're going to try to find a home or something. Right? They're not just going to typically run out into an open field unless you're hiding. And so if you were to run out to Long Hollow, you'd go right out our ranch. So if you followed that road into our ranch, it's about 2 miles, you'd come to this cabin. In my mind, I was theorizing that maybe they were hiding out there and then they had to run. Well, from that cabin, the closest cover that you'd find is this kind of bamboo forest, which is right before you get to that big, what we call the gar pit or gar hole, the big water hole. I thought that maybe they ran into this bamboo forest to hide. And I had heard about one of the 911 calls saying that Con had fallen and broken his ankle.
Oh, you mean Colt? You mean Colt?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, correct, Colt. I apologize. Okay. That he had fallen and broken his ankle. And so if you're running through this forest, you would fall right into that hole. So that was just a theory I had because, a lot of the case just didn't make sense from what was out there. And as we became more involved in the community, we've got friends that know some of the suspects, I guess you'd call, and opened up to us a little bit about some of their theories and things like that. But I'll kind of pause there and see if you've got any questions because there's quite a bit to our involvement in this.
All right. Well, let's just talk about what was your you just moved there from Dallas, a big city, to this small area. What was your reaction when you were kind of thrust into this crazy missing persons story?
Yeah, so my life is full of crazy adventures. So it did not surprise me one bit that we bought a ranch. It was right in the middle of a potential murder. It was kind of surprising though, because you buy this beautiful place and there's bald eagles, there's a lakes. I mean, it's just a beautiful, beautiful ranch. But something that surprised me early on, I met one of a law enforcement officer, I won't say which branch, a very close friend of mine. And he's like, hey, don't go on this ranch without a gun. And I was like, okay. Now, granted, we lived in Dallas for 17 years, but we grew up in the country. So there was a reason we wanted to move out away from the city, and it was kind of get our kids back out in the outdoors as we grew up. So we're not city slickers by any means. I travel all over the world and stuff like that. So I was like, why do I need to keep a gun on me? And he's like, there's some bad characters out here, man. He's like, you need to keep a gun on you. Your wife needs to keep a gun on you. And I thought that was obviously pretty odd. I met one of the suspects one time. He was nice to me. I haven't had a run-in with him. That was Colby. I've never personally had any problems with him that I'm aware of. We've had a few things happen on ranch that there's always questions, but I've never met Con. It was the community itself is a wonderful community, to be honest with you. I know in a lot of the interviews I've heard, some of the podcasts I've heard, some of the TV shows, it kind of paints the almost like a hillbilly area. This community is a very strong community, and there's some amazing people there. Now there's also some outlaws, and Southern Oklahoma has had a history of kind of being an outlaw territory, but it has cleaned up quite a bit over the last 4 or 5 years. Getting a little ahead of myself, but we've done a lot of improvements to that ranch. We built the country's largest privately owned firearms training facility. Law enforcement from all over the state, all the country, and some groups from overseas actually come and train there. And so we've got a lot of involvement with law enforcement too. We donated an airboat to the game wardens when we first moved here. We bought the sheriff's department all their body cameras. And this was obviously after the previous sheriff, and this was with Marty, who's a wonderful guy, or was. He recently passed away. You want to direct me on some of these questions?
No, that's fine. That's fine. Yeah.
Listen, I mean, for us, it's great to have an outsider who went to this area and moved there, because we were outsiders too. And when we got there, we were kind of stunned at how aggressive everybody was. I had a laser on my head the first time we went there to the property. And I was like, whoa, what is happening here? So it's interesting to hear from yourself that you and your wife were told immediately to carry guns on your own property, which is a little crazy.
Yeah, it is. I've lived in a lot of small communities. My dad was in government. We moved on average every 2 years in small towns, and a lot of those had a lot of crime. It's not something that I am not used to. However, it does pique your interest whenever the first time you walk onto a property, someone tells you to carry a gun with you. One of the things we did, just because I realized real quickly that community is very tight. They do welcome outsiders, but are very suspicious sometimes, just in most local communities or small communities. And so it was probably the first 3 months or so, I was at the ranch, and we've got neighbors on both sides that are kin to each other and wonderful people. I called my wife and I was like, hey, I need you to bring 4 handles of Crown Black to the ranch as you're coming up. I'd already came up, and she's like, why? I was like, just trust me. She got there, and I text all my neighbors, and I was like, hey guys, I want y'all to come over. I want to meet y'all, and I have a gift for everyone. And so I was like, do you need the gate code? And they're like, no, we don't need the gate code. And I was like, that's kind of weird. I thought my ranch was fully fenced and no one would get on it, right? Well, people started coming in with side-by-sides and dirt bikes from all corners of the ranch. And I was like, that's strange. And so we introduced ourselves and handed out these bottles of Crown and fit right in. So that's kind of, I know how to kind of make peace in certain areas from move around and being a newcomer quite a bit. But no, it's different. There's some of the best people on earth that you never want to mess with either, if that makes sense.
Yeah. We got that feeling when we went down there too. I mean, we met a lot of nice people down there. It was kind of a weird dichotomy because we were welcomed, but we were unwelcome. Welcome in some areas, unwelcome in others.
Yes. And there's, in small towns, there's a lot of politics. And I'm not just talking about politicians, but inside local communities. I mean, folks have grown up with each other. Their parents grew up with each other. Their grandparents grew up with each other. It's almost, in some cases, you've got some Hatfields and McCoys that also go to church together, right? So it's an interesting dynamic, and I think you can find that you'll find that all across a lot of your smaller communities or rural communities across the United States. But the case always, I'll just kind of keep going and tell you some of the things that we came across.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I knew we were onto something back in, it would have been late 2017, I believe. I mean, this ranch, since it was untouched, there weren't a lot of trails on it. So we would go out, and 3,000 acres is huge. I mean, it's a lot of land, a lot of dense, thick topography. My wife and I and our kids would just go explore. One weekend we were up there, my wife and I were up there by ourselves, and we put on some waders, and there's a creek that kind of feeds our North Lake through a swamp. I was like, hey, let's just go explore that. And so we went exploring this creek with our waders on, and it got real thick. And one thing about the ranch, there are so many venomous snakes out there. I mean, it's crazy. It's a very interesting ranch because the vegetation is so fruitful that in abundance that it provides a lot of habitat for animals. But the snakes are crazy out there. So it started getting dense, and I was like, you know what, we're getting a little snaky right now with water moccasins, so let's crawl out of this. We came out of this little creek. Right in front of me, about 10 yards off this creek, is a shirt. And you may have mentioned it on the podcast already. I walked up to it and I literally was like, oh my God. I was like, I've got to call somebody. So I'm looking at a shirt that is about 5 feet in the air and hanging on a tree branch that is a girl's white undershirt. And the shirt, the way it was cut with a knife, not with scissors because of the ends that were frayed. And there was dark matted, what I could tell was blood around the neck, around the collar. Just to give you a little background, some of your listeners' background, I have hunted my entire life. I know what matted blood looks like over time. And to me, this was matted blood. I took a picture of the shirt. I took a picture of the size of the shirt and called Jim Diggs, who had been out there before. And in that time, so I'd heard lots of things about law enforcement during that time. And lots of things had changed since the case as far as law enforcement and who you can trust and you can't trust out there. And so I was very particular in who I would talk to. And Jim Diggs was one of Paula's contacts. So I contacted Jim and I said, hey, you got to get out here right now. I've got a girl's shirt that's cut up. It's an undershirt. It's been here for a number of years. And this particular area doesn't flood. So a lot of parts on the ranch will flood, but this particular area, because it's spring fed and it flows into a lake, which flows into another lake, it can't flood. So I found it extremely suspicious for a girl's shirt to be on this property, hanging in a tree, cut up with a knife, and have matted blood around the neck. There should not be a girl's shirt on this ranch. Even with poachers sometimes will tie a ribbon somewhere that will give them access to their hunting stand, or they'll put signs out, right, that only they'll know. No one uses a girl's undershirt as a marker. So Jim came out, set it up kind of as a crime scene, bagged and tagged it, took it in, and I didn't ask any questions after that, because one thing I do know that is some of these cases, especially in local communities, if you start talking about things, then things get out very quickly, and I didn't want to have any negative impact on the case.
Do you know what eventually happened to that shirt?
So this is what I've been told. So 3 or 4 months go by. I did tell Paula about this shirt. And so I reached out to Paula. I was like, hey, what came back off that shirt? Because you should be able to DNA test or at least have it as evidence. And she said, Toby, she said, OSBI didn't want it. Now, this is what I was told, right? So there's some things that I know to be facts and some things that I've been told. I said, what do you mean they didn't want it? And she said, well, Jim called in and said he had this shirt and they didn't want it, or I've heard since then that they told him to hold on to it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you what happened to that shirt here in a little bit when I got the answer, which is later in. And this is probably, back in January, I got the answer to what happened to that shirt. So nothing was done with it. And that shirt is gone. And I'll tell you how I found that out here in just a minute. So that really frustrated me. To me, this was some type of evidence of some sort. Was it hers? Maybe. I get kind of obsessive compulsive when it comes to these things. God bless me with ADD, dyslexia, and a processing disorder, which some people call a learning disability, but I'd be able to use it in business. It kind of helps me focus and connect things. And so I actually went through Molly Miller's old Facebook account and found a picture of her in a white girl's undershirt. And this undershirt's kind of like the term, you hear the term wife beaters, the shirts that are real thin that people wear kind of underneath their clothes.
Yeah.
So I actually found a picture that looks just like this shirt that was found on my ranch. Now, the brand of it, I've researched. In my kind of line of work and my career, I'm connected to a lot of different people and a lot of different agencies. And so I've even sent them off to some of my friends at different agencies. And this brand of shirt doesn't exist anymore. And I was trying to tie the brand of the shirt to the date around 2013 and then where that might have been bought. So in these local communities, most of the local kids don't have the luxury of going to the mall like in a Dallas, right? So Dallas is an hour and a half away. Oklahoma City is an hour and a half away. So a lot of their apparel or clothes is bought locally. And that's going to be at a Walmart or something like that. So I was hoping that I could tie that brand there that would give me some type of indication that it was purchased locally around that time frame. But then I think I've sent you the picture of that shirt. But to this date, we don't know where that brand is from. I think that company actually changed, but anyway, we couldn't find out what that was. But so it frustrated me. I was pretty upset that nothing been done with it.
Nothing was tested on the shirt. Did Paula give it to?
No. So I'll go ahead and walk through the whole process with that shirt. Jim Diggs took it. My understanding is he was told to keep it or that they didn't want it. Right. Later on, so I did talk with OSBI and I asked him, I was like, what happened to my shirt? And he's like, what are you talking about? The girl's shirt, size 6 undershirt that was cut up with a knife, not scissors, and had knotted blood around the neck. This gentleman at OSBI said, what are you talking about? He said, I heard about a shirt, but we never saw the shirt. And I was like, let me send you pictures of this. And he literally goes, holy shit. He goes, where is this? And I was like, you tell me. Well, Paula had reached out to Jim Diggs, and this is what I was told, right, is that Jim had told her at one point he'd cleaned out his shop where he had a lot of stuff that was stored, and that bag with the shirt was thrown out. As far as I know, I mean, it's still, Jim may still have it. To our knowledge, that shirt is gone. So it's just another piece of the puzzle that you go, why?
Yeah.
We had Adventures with a Purpose. So Paula brought Adventures with a Purpose out with Jared. Awesome guy. Love this group. I mean, this guy, I think you know him. Mm-hmm. In the last probably 2 years, I think he's probably recovered, 20 or 30 missing persons. I mean, the guy's a freaking rock star. Mm-hmm. They come out to the ranch, do a little episode. He brings out a couple of cadaver dogs. We search the ranch, any areas that would be an area of interest, right? Later in the day, the dog sounded off by that water hole. This dog was hard hitting on cadaver. And these dogs, only the way they're trained, and I don't know if your listeners know much about these dogs, because a lot of people have, they think, a dog will just bark at anything. They're specifically trained to hit on human cadaver. And they're trained, a lot of these dogs go to get certified by the FBI, and that's all they will bark on. So we thought we had it. And the dog was barking about probably 30 feet south of that big hole. And we walked up into the bamboo, kind of where the dog was standing. There was an area that was cleared out. So the dirt had been overturned before. You put your hands in dirt and you feel it soft. It had been overturned. And some of the bamboo had been removed in this area. And so we thought, okay, something's buried here, right? And so we dug about 3 feet deep until the soil changed its content. And we're like, okay, there's nothing here. But it always confuses why that dog hit off on a cadaver right there. Time goes on, fast forward to around December of 2021. So about 10 months ago. There's some things that I experienced out of this ranch that sound very crazy. And I won't go into the details because a lot of your listeners will be like, this guy is crazy. He's a ghost, right?
No.
There's nothing crazy
There's nothing crazy at all, especially with the supernatural stuff, because we've had a few things happen with this case too.
Okay.
There's been a few incidents.
Okay. I'm going to tell you a story that still gives me chills up my arms. So after watching actually your episode, so whenever your episode came out, you actually had more information than I knew. We talked about a potential knife being involved, and then it clicked. All right, that shirt was cut with the knife. And when you take a piece of clothing, and I know you guys know this, but for your listeners, when you take a piece of clothing and you cut it with scissors, it's going to be a pretty fine cut. Right? It's going to be pretty linear. When you cut something with a knife, especially material, it's not going to be a straight line, and there's going to be, the fraying is going to be different over time. When y'all talk about a knife, I was like, I've got to get a metal detector and go metal detector on that tree. I had marked that tree so I would never forget where the shirt was. This was actually, it was spring break. It was actually March of 2020, actually. I'm sorry. It was right when COVID kind of hit. I didn't tell my wife this. I went and bought a metal detector. We were all going to go up spend spring break at the ranch, and I left a day early, went metal detector around this tree. And I metal detected for about 2 hours and got no hits at all. And so I leaned the metal detector up against a tree. And at this point, I'm not by myself and no one's going to think I'm crazy. And I just start talking. And I said, Molly and Colt, if you're here, you're going to have to help me. And that metal detector went off. And I was like, and I didn't think anything of that. I was like, okay, I got a hit. Right. So I dug and dug, checked, nothing. And I was like, man, that's weird. And it was like a hard hit. It wasn't just a little chirp. It was a hard hit. I grabbed a metal detector again and I said, Molly or Colt, are y'all here? Metal detector, I was like, huh. So to make sure that I wasn't hitting on something in a tree or I had no metal on my body at the time, I held the metal detector up in the air. And I said, Molly or Colt, if you're here, you have to do that again and prove it to me. Metal detector goes, zzz. What was interesting about it too is the metal detector was hitting on all metals, right? Well, I've never seen a metal detector do that before. And so I just said, I had a metal detector, no one's there. All of a sudden, I feel like I'm talking to a ghost of some sort. And I started asking questions and asked multiple questions. And one of the questions I asked him, what I would get is when I would ask a question and it would respond with a beep, to me, that was affirmation, right? Ask a question, no beep, nothing. And so I asked, are you buried here? No beep, right? Were you murdered here? No beep. Are you in Moxley Lake? Okay, I'm listening. I got it. Okay. From there, I was kind of freaked out, to be honest with you. I didn't tell many people. I was kind of like, this is kind of weird. I told my wife about it, but I was CEO of a company, right? So having these conversations with people, and I do a lot of work with private equity firms. I'm very involved in a lot of business communities and don't really want people to think I'm talking to ghosts. Fast forward another year, one of my best buddies is out here, Matt Tardio. He helps run our firearms at the ranch, our training facility. Matt has extensive, he's a Green Beret and has extensive background in metal detecting. And so Matt, one night, we're hanging out at the house and I tell him the story about the metal detector. And he's super intrigued about the Molly Miller case. Everyone that comes out there, we talk about it, we watch your show, right? And he's like, Toby, metal detectors don't do that. And I was like, well, I'm telling you, this one did. And he's like, yeah. He's like, did you calibrate it to the dirt? It's like, no, I didn't. He's like, dude, I've got thousands of hours on metal detectors. He's like, let's go out there tomorrow. And I was like, I'll tell you what you did wrong. I'm like, cool. So we take the metal detector out. He calibrates it to the dirt. He does all the things. And I said, okay. I was like, come over here in this area, hold the metal detector up and ask a question. And he's like, what do you want me to ask? I was like, just ask if Molly or Colt's here. He holds the metal detector in the air and goes, Molly or Colt, are you here? Metal detector goes, bzzz. He freaked out. He's like, Toby, he's like, what is going on? I was like, keep asking. And so we're asking questions. He said, Toby, this can't be happening. Metal detector turns off. And he's like, bro, the metal detector just turned off. I was like, I told you something's going on, right? After that, we asked some questions and got some beeps and it's just very odd, right? So to kind of prove that the metal detector wasn't bad, we went all over the ranch, search for stuff, ask for questions, never happened again. Normal metal detector. Then a few months later, there's a woman that comes out that I could tell has a little bit of a gift. And there's certain people that I do believe that have gifts that may be more in tune with things. And so she had no idea about Molly Miller case. She'd never been to the ranch before. And we're hanging out one night and me and Matt were there. And I was like, you know what? I was like, do you want to go someplace kind of cool? And she's like, sure. This is like at midnight. All right. This is in December in southern Oklahoma. It is cold. It is dark. It is overcast. And I was like, hey, we're going to go to the woods. And she's like, okay, cool. So we put on jackets, put on headlamps, and we have another guy with us. So there's 4 of us. And we take her to this place. And Matt looked at me. He's like, oh, yeah, this will be fun. So I actually put the metal detector in the back of the truck and no one saw me do it. We got out there and this woman immediately, so we parked next to this wooded area where where we've had this experiences where the shirt was found, right? That was cut up. And she immediately jumps out of the truck and starts walking straight in the woods. I'm like, whoa, don't do that. We need headlamps. Like, you're gonna get lost out there. So we put the headlamps on and she starts walking through the woods and she walks right past the tree where we had the shirt. And she grabs a stick and she starts messing around the leaves. She goes, Toby, what happened here? And I was like, what are you talking about? And she said, Toby, someone was murdered here. And me and Matt look at each other and she was like, why was someone murdered here? I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. And I said, and she goes, it's a girl. And I said, what's her name? And she goes, Maggie? And me and Matt look at each other. I'm still like, right now as I'm telling this, the hairs on my arms are sticking up. Well, Maggie's not Molly, but it's pretty dang close. And so I go and I was like, I got a metal detector. I want to try something. So I go and get the metal detector. Matt calibrates it. We turn it on. And I was like, I want you to start asking questions to this metal detector. She has no clue who she's talking to. She's asking questions, nothing, just kind of irrelevant questions. And I was like, give me the metal detector. I was like, Molly, are you here? The metal detector goes, bzzz. This woman, I've never experienced anything like this in my life. It kind of changed a little bit of my life. This woman starts wailing, speaking in tongues. Her eyes roll back in their head and she takes off running towards the lake and she's yelling at me. And this person is scared for her life. This person that was just normal. And she was yelling at me and she said, they're going to catch us. Why are they chasing us? They're going to get us. We have to run. But she grabbed my hand and she's dragging me through the woods. What she doesn't know is that where she's dragging us is where the metal detector would ping, right? She gets to the edge of the water. And so back in 2013, there was a big drought. So when Molly went missing, this was a big drought in Oklahoma, the Molly and Colt. And so our North Lake was almost completely bone dry. Even though it's spring fed, there was a dam that was broken. So the water line was very different. And so she's running through the woods. She hits the edge of the water and she looks at me and she says, "Why is there water here? There's not supposed to be water here." And I look at her and like, we're freaking out. Like me and we've got two other guys with me and we're like, okay, what in the world is going on? And so she falls on the ground and starts rolling around the ground. She puts her hands around her throat and starts saying, "I can't breathe. I can't breathe. Why are they doing this to me?" And she's rolling around the ground violently, this woman. And so I actually straddle her. I get on top of her. This is how violently she's rolling around the ground, like in the mud at midnight in December. And so I get on and I start talking to her. And I said, "Molly, we're listening. We're here." And I said, "Where are you?" And she points to the sky. And in the most, I wish I could give you the sound that she made, but she growled and she said, "Lake." And I said, "Which one?" And she pointed her hand and said, "Lake." It's her South Lake. And I look up and Matt has tears running down his face. This is a Green Beret that has done some amazing things for our country. The other guy that's with me is like completely like freaked out. I talked to her and I said, "Molly, look, we're coming back. Your family misses you. We're going to find you." And I said, "I need you to release this person." I'm just not saying her name because I don't think she'd want me to say her name. And I said, "I need you to release her now. We're going to come back." And this woman, it was interesting too. This woman had glasses on and one side of her glasses completely fogged over. She does this, like, if you've ever seen anyone pass away, unfortunately I have, there's a last breath. We call it a death breath, where your body just completely relaxes, right? Her body completely relaxed. She did a big like groan, like eyes came back, glasses defogged. And she goes, "Toby, why am I on the ground? What happened? Did I pass out?" She's like, "Why am I covered in mud?" She's like, "Seriously, guys, what happened?" And we're like, "Nope, you did fine." She's like, "Did I do something weird?" We're like, No, you're fine." And I was like, let's go back. And she was like, "I am starving. Like, I have to have something to eat. Why am I starving?" And so we get in the truck and she's like, "I need to know what happened." I'm like, "You know what? Let's just get back to the house and let's get you some food and we'll talk about it later." I'm going to pause there because I know that is going to be a little bit of a crazy story, but that's the honest to God truth. That happened. And you have any questions until I go into the next part of it?
Yeah. So do you have any questions?
I'm not surprised, to be honest, because when we were at Moxley Lake, and this is close to Moxley Lake, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. I had the worst goosebumps that, like, when I'm in a place that I know something's going on supernaturally, I will get really bad goosebumps, and it's not the normal kind. They don't just go away. And I kept telling Rob, I said, something's here. Like, I could feel the energy was stagnated, you know? But I also felt like there's a lot of supernatural stuff happening out there, more than just Molly and Colt. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah.
And I think because sometimes there's spiritual vortexes, I think that hole has something. There's something there.
I want you to kind of go into a little bit about what you told me yesterday with some of the neighbors that you've been befriended. And because I confirmed that story, that neighbor wasn't alone when he saw what he saw. And I know who he was with. So
awesome. Good. We're pretty involved in the community. We have people here. I mean, this is our family. Right. And I say that because in small communities, especially if you're a rancher, your neighbors are either your most valuable asset or they're not. And our neighbors are all very good friends. Our kids play together, and the local community talks a lot about this case. People want this case solved. He'd actually told me a story about whenever Molly went missing, he and another person, the one that you confirmed the story with, had taken night vision onto the property that is in question, I guess, the next property.
Yep.
That there were guys walking around with guns around a cabin and that looked totally high out of their minds. And it freaked both of them out so much that they left the property. A lot of these people never have been interviewed. And I think there's reasons why, because these communities, I mean, they've got kids, you don't want to be on anyone's target. And some of the folks that are suspects have a reputation that probably is warranted. And a lot of these people that you talk about, they're suspects I've never met before. So, I can't talk about any personal interactions, but just what I've heard. There are lots of stories.
Let me back you up a little bit, because you told me a little bit more details yesterday and what they actually saw. And the other person that we know of that was with that other person said some other things as well, that there was some harps.
Yeah, okay. I've not actually ever heard that.
Okay.
So what my friend told me was essentially exactly what I told you. It was short and sweet. We went over there. We had night vision. One of them, I think, had a gun on them. And there were guys walking around this cabin that were blowing out of their mind that had guns. And I, some of the times when I get told stuff, there's sometimes where I ask questions or sometimes when I don't. There's reasons for that. But we did get more details later on, which I'll talk about here in a minute as well. But it scared them enough. And these are tough men. These are not little boys. These are people that have been born and raised. They hog hunt with dogs. I mean, these are tough people. And so for them to be frightened and leave the property paints a picture of what might have been going on.
That night, it was the night that Molly and Colt went missing now.
I believe it was either that night or the following night. I don't know specifically which night it was, but he said it was right after. So I'm making assumptions here. You've had the conversation with the person that was with him. You probably have more details than I do on that.
The one thing I want to kind of tighten the loop on that one is that what we've been told is that person that was with your neighbor friend, his family got him out of the area. He doesn't live there anymore.
Okay. And I don't know any of that.
When I talked to you yesterday, I started digging and then I found that out.
That's awesome. Well, and that's super important in cases like this, because now we've got two stories that match up, and that also lets me know that this person didn't make it up, and this person doesn't have a reputation for making things up either.
We're going to pause Toby's interview right here because we want to share a tip that came in a couple of years after Molly and Colt disappeared.
This tip corroborates what Toby's neighbor said to him about seeing what happened the night we believe Molly and Colt were killed. We have altered this person's voice and withheld the names to protect their identities.
My son was one of the people down there at that party that night. He knows stuff, but he's scared. He says the police on up to everybody that's involved is people that can stop it. He's worried about getting killed. The law enforcement in Love County and Carter County, and even higher up than that, they're dirty. Too many people involved that have hidden stuff, and he knows it. And he can't. Things that he's told me, they're too upsetting. I need to let somebody know, because if he knew he could trust somebody, he would tell them. The things that stuck in my mind that he was telling me, and I could tell he was trying to kind of get it off his chest, because he asked me if he thought God would ever forgive him. Anyway, the night that Colt was killed, there was a party down there on Long Hollow, and he said that he told me he's almost 100% sure that Con's uncle is the killer of Molly. I don't know his name, he told me, but he lives down there in a house, has like a tower, a big tower thing in it, and he's got like guns up there, like an armored tower in his house up there. And he said a lot of names, but none of them stuck with me. And all these people, I don't know them at all. And Colt was a very good kid. So was Molly. They went down there for this party. He said there was lots of people there. It was whoever knows in the drug people down there, You go down that road, he said there was a trailer. It burned. They burned it, or it burned. He said there was a trailer there, or something, hollowed out, or, an old trailer is what I got the impression. I was in shock, I'm kind of unbelief that he was that close to what had happened. I guess this guy, he said he believes there's lots of others down there. He thinks this guy's just, evil. The Con and him, they're all evil. He said they're a family of evil people. Inside the house, Con got into an argument with Colt about some stuff, an amount of drugs that was minor that I guess Molly had and hadn't paid for or something. But he pulled out a .22 and held it to Colt's head. Yeah, Colt Haynes' head. And Colt, they went at it quite a bit, arguing, and that Con down. He said a bunch of stuff. It was kind of cutting it. It cut Con down, because I guess from the sound of it, he's an idiot, obviously he's an idiot, but it sounded to me like he was interested in Molly sexually or something. He said, we can take care of it right now. Something like, let me take her in the back room or something. That got Holt upset or something. He come back at Con and all of this, and it didn't happen then, but somebody stepped in and said, all right, this is family. Y'all have to go, go outside, and there was an argument going on. Well, they all went back outside to some party thing, whatever they're doing out there. They heard the shot, and he says he's sure that that's the shot that killed Colt. They all heard a gunfire. Everybody started splitting from there, I guess. Joe Russell turns the police around because he knew what was going on down there, and he didn't want him to get caught. His family, the sheriff of the county, is this ranching family's relative. And he said that there's people higher than that guy that are making money. I guess evidently he had a giant marijuana patch down there. The sheriff has a huge acreage of marijuana growing down there. He's got to come forward. And he's got to come forward for himself. When he told me this, I said, we were sitting in front of, I was fixing to drop him off from work, and I said, you know some things, don't you? You've seen some things. And he looked at me, and I could tell he was needing to talk. He's carrying a heavy burden. He told me he told me this too. I can explain it to you, but I'm not sure I get it right, and it's very important. I feel like you might know it, but I don't think you do know it. There was a bunch of back and forth going in between Con and his uncle, because that friend of Cody's that he's been friends with, he was inside the house, and he wasn't going to leave without him. And they went back and forth, and finally they left, and the kid came back because they knew that he had shot Colt. They came back with some night vision. They didn't come down the road. They went through some pasture, had a shotgun. He had some kind of a rifle, and they looked through the window. They watched in night vision, and they saw, I believe, his uncle and someone else go to the barn and come back with a tarp, something like a tarp. And they went in the house and a bucket also. So he's pretty sure they put Colt in that tarp and put him in the truck and took him and disposed of him somewhere. Well, they went up there. They snuck clear up to the house. He realized that because Molly was still in there, she was crying and carrying on, and that other kid was in there, and the uncle was in there. He's pretty sure they've killed other people down there. And, it's not like he can prove it, but these are evil, evil people. They have connections in the law enforcement. There's nobody he feels like he can trust.
Now let's go back to Toby to find out what else he has to say.
I'll tell you what, you drink whiskey, sit around a campfire, stories come out. And some stories are kind of crazy that you put your logic hat on, you're like, it doesn't really make sense. Some of them make a lot of sense. I've learned through listening to some of your podcasts and watching other podcasts and just doing my own research and my conversations with people in the local area that a lot of some of the theories probably have some type of fact behind them. This next part is where it gets, if you think everything's been interesting that I've told you so far, this one, I think your listeners are going to like. I called Jared at Adventures of Purpose, and I told him, I was like, Jared, dude, I'm going to tell you this story that happened to me. I know it's going to sound crazy. Jared and I become good friends. He's like, Toby, I believe you. He's like, in fact, we're going to be in Oklahoma around this time. Why don't we come out and we'll search that hole? So back, I think it was probably 2017 or 18, and you may have a specific date, we had a dive team come out and dive our South Lake. And I wasn't actually there. It was before we moved there, and I was working. And had a dive team out there and didn't find anything. But I was also told that they dove this hole, this water pit in between both lakes. And I was told that it was about 12 feet deep, which makes sense because you really can't see the bottom of it. I called Jared. He brought out his team. When they got in the hole, I knew immediately that the information I was given was wrong because this hole is only about 4 feet deep. And we did have Light Horse and Police Department with us. This search I told no one about except OSBI, and we had Light Horse out there, and no one even knew Light Horse was out there, and which is Chickasaw Nation. Great group, by the way, awesome group. And so they had one of their detectives with us, one of the crime scene detectives, and I told him what we're doing, and he was going to provide kind of overwatch if we found something. And so the guys were diving. There's a lot of debris in this hole. They take a break, they walk out, and they had brought a cadaver dog with them. And the cadaver dog was sent in, and the cadaver dog was hitting off on their footprints where they were stepping. And we all looked at each other and we're like, holy crap. There's a cadaver in that hole, right? So what was happening was Jared and the rest of his dive team, since they could stand, they were walking in this mud. And as they walked out, that dog was hitting on their steps, which would be cadaver odor, right? And they're specifically tied to human cadaver odor, which now makes sense because the cadaver dog before hit about 30 feet from this hole. And back then the water was moving. We all looked at each other like, we got to drain this thing. So I went and got an 8-inch portable pump, rented it, brought it out. We dug a ramp And this is digging a ramp in the woods, right? You got construction equipment. I mean, this is a big orchestrating ordeal. We drain this hole, completely drain it, and it's spring fed. So we drain it and we send cadaver dog in. The cadaver dog hits hard on a spot. I mean, hard hit. And so we're all looking at each other. The dog handler, he said, "You want more cadaver dogs?" And we're like, "Yeah, you can get them." He goes, "Yeah." This first cadaver dog that hit, this was an FBI certified out of Virginia cadaver dog. What's amazing is within 2 hours, we had 2 more cadaver dogs come out. I mean, that's pretty remarkable in a rural community to have 2 people drop what they're doing, bring their dogs immediately. And so we told the dog handlers nothing. We did not give them any indication that we even had a hit. We said, "We want you to search this area." We left one dog handler back in our lodge so they wouldn't see anything that was going on. So this woman sends her dog in, which is also a FBI certified out of Virginia cadaver dog. That dog searches, goes right to the exact same spot, hard hit. So now we have 2 cadaver dogs hitting on the exact same spot in this hole, which also, if your listeners remember earlier in your podcast, the 911 call, the butt dial, was pinged right there. And that cleaned up version of that 911 butt dial is actually one that I had some of my friends do. So when I first heard on your first episode a kind of a snip of that call, I asked Paul if I could have the file. And I sent the file off to some of my friends and it came back clean. So you can actually hear a lot of what they're saying, a lot more than what you could. And in that call, Colby says, that's right where they were pinged, was right down there. He says they're in 4 feet of water right over there. Right. Well, our hole is 4 feet of water. Right. So we bring the 3rd cadaver dog over. 3rd cadaver dog, hard hit. Okay, we got something. There's a human in this hole. So the dog handler calls the FBI's top equine cadaver dog search person in the country and talks to her, and she says, "Okay, I want y'all to vacate the area." And she says the next morning, whenever the dew is on the top of the water, she said, "I want you to send those dogs in." And so the reason that is, I found out, is that's going to be a still moment, and that's whenever the odor is going to be most present and more concentrated versus if there's wind going, it can move around. So we did that. Dogs hit hard on the same spot again. So we dug. We did. And so we dug with shovels. Visualization is you have a hole that's like digging in a slushy. So every time you put the shovel in, it fills back up. So we knew that we could not excavate this hole with our manual tools. We've got to get a backhoe or excavator in there. So the next day, I let OSBI know that we had 3 different cadaver dog hits. The first response kind of made me mad. It was kind of, well, cadaver dogs hit. That's what happens with cadaver dogs. You never know what they have. I was like, let me restate. I was like, this was in a text message. I was like, we had 3 different FBI certified cadaver dogs hit the same spot 2 days in a row on camera. Are you interested? And they said, "Yes, we are. Can we get a backhoe in there?" And so we talked back and forth. It's one of the things that they've said that I can do it personally if I want to. They'll be there when I do it, but there's not really any support behind it, right? So
let me just repeat what you said. You said that you had all this cadaver dog hit on that pit, on the hole, and then they were interested, but they're saying, "Well, we won't dig it up, but you can dig it up." Someone who's not a law enforcement trained forensic expert, and then we'll wait to see what happens. Is that what you just said?
That's correct. That's 100% accurate.
Okay.
And so obviously very frustrated, right? I'm talking with some of my buddies out there, and for your listeners, there's only about 8 people in this world that know that we did that search. We didn't tell Paul about it. We told no one except OSBI and Light Horse that was there with us. And I had a very select group of friends that were out there that are all special forces guys. So this is the first time this story has been told. So that was back in January. And now my life is very busy, and I don't want anyone to think that I'm neglecting this. In order to dig this hole, if we go in there with an excavator and we don't have someone that is a forensics expert, a crime scene investigator, I mean, you've probably seen on TV, make a sieve, you sift through everything. Bones, whenever they're in water, especially in this area that's a spring fed. So also for your listeners, being that's a spring fed, the next day when we went to do the dogs again, that entire hole was full of water, so we had to drain it again. A lot of vegetation, and the bones, I was taught this by Jared, actually, the bones turn black. So you've got a lot of branches in there, and a bone looks just like a branch when it's black in a lot of cases. So if we go in there with an excavator and we start digging this hole, I mean, we don't know what we're doing. I mean, unless we come across a skull or an actual bone that looks like a bone. I mean, a cadaver dog could hit off on a human tooth. Now, there are also, we discussed this as well. So these cadaver dogs, they have found ancient bones before, right? So Indians. And Battle Springs Ranch was actually named by the Native Americans because of the resources and all the battles they had over this, because these springs have been there for tens of thousands of years. We find arrowheads that are over 10,000 years old on this property. So one theory was that it could be an Indian. Well, back in 1918, whenever this lake was purchased by this gentleman's rod and reel club, these guys were old tycoons, they were congressmen, they were senators. I actually found in this newspaper article from 1918 about how they dug this spillway. So we know that spillway was dug just over 100 years ago. The ground level is about 30 feet that they dug into the spillway to connect both lakes. So that kind of excludes Native Americans just because the age and the depth that was dug. So the human remains that are in this hole are less than 100 years old. Now, that doesn't mean that it's not someone's finger from 80 years ago, but we do have human remains there. And in order to do this properly, we've got to have someone out there that knows what they're doing. Because if we mess something up, or if we discard something, just not out of negligence, but just not out of understanding and training, we could ruin this case if there's something there. We know there's human remains there. Whose they are, we don't know yet. So I have not dug this hole yet. Once in my world, I think you mentioned yesterday, February, Ukraine happened. I've been to Ukraine. We built a village over there to house women and children that have been displaced. I've been traveling all over the world. I mean, my life is very, very busy. And I don't want anyone to think that we're just kind of waving this off, but we're planning on digging that soon. To me, there's something there. You know, who it is, hopefully we'll find some closure. I don't know. There's 100% human remains in that hole.
Well, what I thought was really interesting when we went out there for the television show, is the fact that it was so hidden, that little area.
Yes.
The perfect place. It's like if you were going to kind of write a script on a place where you were going to put something or hide something, you know, in the middle of your ranch.
Oh, yeah.
In between these two large bodies of water.
We talk about this hole being secluded and hard to find, right? So earlier in the call, I talked about like no one knew that was there. Well, this was 2016 when I found that hole, right? And realistically 2017, right? December of 2016. Molly and Colt had gone missing since 2013, right? So you get a little over 3 years. And no one had ever seen this before. And Paul will tell you, they did lots of searches on this ranch. And no one had ever seen this hole before. It's interesting. It is very interesting. This case obviously is extremely sad, but there's like a little twist at every single corner.
I'm glad you, as an outsider who hasn't grown up in that area, it's really refreshing to see your perspective, because you have that innate ability to be inquisitive, and also you have a lot of common sense. And I think that's the biggest problem with this case, is that no one really looks at this case with common sense. Law enforcement doesn't, and they have it in the beginning. And unfortunately, that area has been problematic with, you had the reign of Joe Russell for 16 years, and he was running a criminal enterprise out of his sheriff's office. You won't believe the stuff that people are telling us inside the sheriff's department, that people that have worked with him, the stuff that he's done, and the fact that he was able to walk away with a slap on the wrist and not being either prosecuted or at least pressured into giving more information, because we don't believe that he was involved in the killing and the disappearance of Molly and Colt. But we know that he knows what happened, and that's the problem. And I think law enforcement really missed an opportunity when they had him over a barrel at the grand jury hearing, and they could have used that as leverage to get more information out of him. Now, maybe they did, and his information came up inconclusive, but I think they really missed an opportunity. And the fact that he's walking around when he had several felonies, and he was propagating all of this drug distribution out of his office, out of his house. He had Con and Colby cooking meth at his house. So there's so many things connection. And the only people that tried to connect it was the FBI. I don't know if you've seen these documents, but I've been happy to send them to you. It's fascinating reading. I've been sharing it to a lot of other law enforcement and legal experts to kind of get their feedback on it. And they tried to connect it in the grand jury hearing. So I know they were trying. So at least the FBI was. So it's very frustrating for us because we deal with these cases all the time. I mean, this is not the first missing person cases we've dealt with before. We deal with a lot of them. We get contacted a lot by law enforcement agencies all over the country. Said, listen, we don't have the bandwidth to really focus on this case. Can you help us? Because we know that, by getting it out publicly like this, we've gotten a lot of tips. We get tips probably once a week after the podcast airs on Friday. Mm-hmm. Sometimes Friday night at midnight, someone will call, and there's a lot of stuff that we haven't aired yet that we're just kind of marshaling our forces because we want to do it at the right time. Because I think what happened is that nothing's been done right in this case.
And I love that people like you and your wife exist because, it does, kind of what you'd mentioned from an outsider's perspective. Some people are not trusting of law enforcement. Some people are afraid to talk to law enforcement. And law enforcement, a lot of times, has got hundreds of cases going on. Dedicating resources in some of these smaller communities sometimes is not as easy as others. It's not like CSI on TV, right? You guys give a different light, different perspective, have the ability to, almost kind of go behind the scenes and not have that badge that sometimes people are afraid of.
Exactly. Because what happens here is that we're not here for sensationalism. We're not here to try to make anyone look bad, but we're going to report what happened because the only way you're going to be able to get to the answers is to realize how it got screwed up initially. That's the only way you can reverse engineer this investigation. Because that's what Paula is the only one who has not been reverse engineering this investigation. She has been fanning the flames of every lead that she gets, and she's getting it, and she's going out there. She's putting herself out there. This woman is amazing. I can't believe the level. She sent me stuff last night that I couldn't believe. I go, she has so much information that she goes, I just found this, and we need to look at this. And I go, and how long have you had this? And she goes, I've had this for like 3 years. And I'm like, holy crap. I mean, this is insane. She has so much information. And the thing is that we're very pro law enforcement. I have friends and family that are out there. I mean, I've done tons of law enforcement programming where we highlight them and their expertise. Have tons of friends in this area, both legally and everything. So it's like we cannot not make you look bad when you look bad, when you don't do your job and you discount it, and then you find there was a level of corruption underneath that, and that's a reason why this case has not been solved, because everybody says the same thing. It's not that complicated. Had they done the things that they needed to do in the beginning, had Joe Russell not called off that search, this wouldn't have happened.
I mean, dude, even so, the 911 butt dial, right? And when the dispatcher calls Joe Russell, and this is recorded, and says, I think I've got someone confessing to the Molly Miller case or something about the Molly Miller case. And his first comment was, is it Moxie Lake? Yeah, she didn't say Moxie Lake.
Exactly.
And you just listen to just that alone, and it makes the hair on your back of your neck stick up, not in a pleasant way. But no, I'm glad that you guys are doing what you're doing. It is hard being local, and like my background, companies pay me to solve problems. This is one that has been really difficult because, even with the cadaver dogs, right? And I told you, no one knows about it. Very few people know about that. There's reasons for that.
Yeah. Well, that's the problem. That Paul has been doing the same thing over the last year and a half. She's been very protective of the information, whereas before she would get something. Perfect example is when a year ago, when the eyewitness in episode 11 gives Paula what we possibly could be the murder weapon after Paula breaks him down, and then she goes right to the law enforcement in Love County and hands him the gun. She knows what to do. She knows to put it in a paper bag. That's what you do. And she knows that she's been trained now because she wants to preserve all this stuff. And then that gun, she's told that it's going to be sent to OSBI. And then we just found out literally about a month ago, it was never sent to OSBI. It was never tested. They just gave it back to the original owner.
That doesn't make any sense. If it is even suspected to be used in a crime. Yeah, granted, I'm not an attorney. I'm not law enforcement. I'm not any of those things, but it doesn't make sense why you would give that back. And at the same time, like that shirt, I do know, and I've had extensive talks with the OSBI, and there's some great people over there. I will say that. I know that it is very easy to point out things that are wrong. In this case, 100%. But one of the guys told me, he's like, we get calls all the time about some evidence, right? Something, a tennis shoe, this or that. And he's like, we can't go after everything. I was like, I understand that. I do. It is hard to search, but in my opinion, just purely my opinion, whenever you do have an area of suspicion or an area that might have some logic to it, you kind of want to dig into it.
We appreciate you talking to us, and we love the fact that you're looking into this case, and because you're down there, you're in ground zero, my friend.
Oh yeah, we are. I mean, when I pull out my gate, I mean, a lot of the people that you talked on the podcast, I mean, they're still around. Some of the people that you've mentioned that are some law enforcement and people like that we go to church with. It's difficult. It is difficult.
I appreciate it. I'm glad that you're on this. I like what you do, Toby. I mean, you seem like
you're amazing.
You're an impactful person.
This is fantastic.
And
it's so great to have another person there who's in the area who's as passionate about this as Paula and we are.
I am very passionate about it. I have 2 daughters. No one ever wants to have a child go missing. No one ever wants to have a child pass away. I'm pretty sure we're not going to find them alive anywhere at this point. And anything I can do to help bring closure. I don't personally care about putting people in jail. That's not my thing. That's law enforcement. If I can contribute to giving closure to that family, I'm at their disposal. Thank you again, what you guys are doing, because your podcast is being talked about throughout this community. And I bet 75% of people in southern Oklahoma that have access to the internet are listening to everything that you guys are saying.
Yeah, we know. We get the analytics. we can drill. We know exactly what they're listening to it on whether it's an iPhone, awesome. Their computer, and we know a lot of it's in Ardmore. But yeah, we appreciate it. But yeah, let's stay in touch.
Thank you so much, Toby.
Thank you.
All right.
Have a great day. You
Bye-bye.
too.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Next time on Partners in True Crime.
I know the NIPS pretty well. I know the DA. I hired him. I know the sheriff. I know the judge in Love County. I hired him. And I know that area well. Climate and the atmosphere, and nothing changes.
If you or anyone you know is suffering from a methamphetamine addiction, please contact the American Meth Addiction Hotline.
If you or anyone you know has been the victim of sexual abuse, please contact the National Domestic Violence Hotline.
For any tips relating to the disappearance of Molly Miller and Colt Haynes, please contact 833-4-MOLLY and Colt, and they will be directed to the proper law enforcement agency.
All rights reserved. This has been a production of 722 Media Content. Please visit our website where you can subscribe to the podcast, find show notes, and listen to Vi's original song, Take Me Back, written for Molly Miller.